The first thing I noticed about the municipal archive was the smell. The thin, papery scent of sun-bleached pages steeped with something wetter. Salt, maybe, or the breath of a long-closed mouth. The building took up an entire block, an old school converted into a place where the city stored what it didn't want to forget. Deeds, permits, medical records from the hospital that used to stand across the street. No one wanted night shifts in a maze of other people's lives, but it was a paycheck, and I told myself I liked quiet. I arrived just after sunset with a thermos of coffee and my badge still warm from the printer. The clerk who handed me keys had the look of someone who didn't love the building either. He rattled off rules and pointed me toward the scanning room. "Motion sensors are twitchy," he said, like a confession. "Try not to set them off. Oh, and if you hear the pipes sing, it's just the old boiler." He paused then, eyes flicking toward the window as if expecting to see something already standing there. "If anything seems different, call security." "Different how?" I asked. He shrugged and gave me a small smile. "You won't miss it." By the time I reached the third floor, the building had swallowed the last of the day. The halls were wide but crowded by the weight of history. Every light fixture hummed with a throatier sound than it should have. The elevator wasn't to be trusted. They'd told me that too. So I took the stairs, trailing my fingers along a banister rubbed smooth by generations of hands. The scanning room door stuck in the frame before it opened on a breath of stale cold. I flicked the switch. Fluorescents stuttered to life, painting the room in a chalky glare. Steel tables, flatbed scanners, a wheeled chair that spun half a turn as if I'd just startled it. Boxes weighted like squat little gravestones, each hand-lettered in black marker. I chose the one closest to me, City Hospital, Neonatal ICU, 1932 to 1934, because it seemed wrong somehow to make the past wait longer. The first hour passed in the gentle monotony of work, cradle the ledger, ease it onto the glass, lower the scanner lid as though tucking a child to sleep. The machine made a soft, comforting sound as the light bar slid across each page. I settled, eventually, into the rhythm of it. The world narrowed to paper and light. Somewhere in the building, a pipe took a breath and let it out as a low, hollow moan. I froze, half bent over a ledger. It wasn't a dramatic sound, more like someone humming a sad note through a long, empty bottle. It rose and fell, then stopped. The lights smudged shadows against the ceiling. I told myself the clerk had warned me about the boiler. I scanned another page. When I reached the bottom of the box, a motion sensor clicked in the hallway outside. The sound isn't loud, more a polite clearing of the throat, but at night it felt like a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. Under the door, a strip of darkness shifted, then stilled. "Hello?" My voice was a voice from another room. Nothing answered. I got up, peered through the wired glass of the door. The hall was empty, or seemed empty, the way a winter field seems empty until a hair moves. The exit sign painted everything a bleary red. At the far end, a window reflected a sliver of my own face. Behind me, in the scanning room, the chair turned another half-inch with a patient squeak. When I went back to the table, a single sheet of paper had fallen from the last ledger to the floor. It lay face down. I bent to pick it up and found my fingers hesitant, as if the paper waited to sting. It didn't. It was only a page like the others. Still, when I slid it into place on the scanner glass, the light bar paused for a heartbeat longer than usual before it started to crawl. The hallway sensor clicked again. I took my thermos down to the tiny break nook for something to do besides listen. The vending machine rattled itself awake, as if I'd kicked it. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the soda door and watched my breath fog it. The building was never truly still. It held its own heartbeat somewhere, slow and deep. When I turned to go back, there were wet prints on the linoleum, oval smudges, almost slate-colored, leading from the far hallway to the door I'd just come through. My first thought was roof leak. It had rained last week, a brief tantrum of weather that left soil sucked dark. But the ceiling above the prints was dry, squares of pocked foam with the faintest scatter of dead flies. The prints gleamed under the fluorescent lights, as if freshly made. They were the color of wet ash. Not boot prints or sneakers or heels. Bare feet. The toes weren't distinct, just blurred ovals, as if the skin had pressed too long into a tight shoe and never quite sprung back. "Hey," I said to no one. because something in me needed to be heard. A door closed somewhere not far. It was a small sound, careful, like someone who didn't want to wake a sleeping house. I followed the prints down the hall, even though I knew that was the wrong thing to do. They weren't a neat line. They stopped in places, pivoted, started again. At a junction, the prints split. One set continued toward records intake, the other toward the stairwell. I stood there shivering in the overcooled air, the thermos lid sweating in my hand. The stairwell smelled different, less paper, more stone. The prints led downward, pale against the darker concrete. The motion light over the landing flicked on as if I were already halfway there. I stepped onto the landing and saw a shape through the wired glass to the second-floor corridor. A woman standing very still, her face turned toward me, her body in profile to the hall. She was impossible to misread, even through the distortion of the glass, even in the harsh light that flattened everything into chalk. She was white, not pale like a winter hand, but white like the underbelly of a fish pulled too long from the dark. Her hair fell in a curtain, long and black, and whatever she wore, dress, gown, clung to her as if it had been painted on and left to dry. Her feet, visible below the hem, were dark gray. That, more than her stillness, drew my eyes. Dark gray, as if smoke had stained them from within. The wired glass made a mesh of her eyes, but I knew they were black. It wasn't a guess. It was like remembering something from a dream. The breakneck air felt suddenly heavy in my lungs, as if it had thickened while I wasn't looking. "Can I help you?" I asked, because the script for dealing with strangers is comforting. "Ma'am?" She turned her face fully toward me. The mesh of the glass turned the oval of her face into 100 tiny windows, all looking in. She didn't move toward the door. She didn't move at all. And yet I had the sensation of her drawing nearer, the way a storm feels closer when you turn your head and hear it on the new side of your ear. "Security doesn't like visitors after hours," I said. My hand, of its own accord, touched the stair railing as if to steady me. The metal felt damp. When I looked, my palm was clean. Something in my head said, "Do not open the door." She moved, finally. Not toward me. She stepped sideways, one slow, deliberate step, so she was no longer framed by the stairwell door's window. I heard the whisper of fabric without seeing it move. The sound was wrong, a little too close to skin. I realized then what I'd been trying not to. The dress wasn't on her so much as it was of her. The fabric seemed to merge with the pallor of her, a seamless continuation, as if her body had poured itself into an idea of clothing and set. I went back to the scanning room the long way, a route that kept me from passing that door again. Every instinct said not to call security, not because I wasn't frightened, but because it felt like bringing another person into a room with a sleeping animal. You don't wake the sleep, you let it lie and find your way around it. I worked. That's what I told myself. I set up the next box. The scanner hummed. The page numbers rose. My breath slowed. The motion sensor outside clicked once, twice, then went silent. When the power failed, it didn't go all at once. The fluorescents dimmed as if someone had put a hand over them. The scanner light bar kept moving for a second after the rest of the room had gone soft and gray, a narrow comet flying slow. Then everything went dark. The silence after the hum felt loud. The sudden cold felt personal. Emergency lighting snapped on in the hallway. Small, sour bulbs, more suggestion than illumination. In that chalky glow, under the door, I saw something like smoke gather and move. It took my brain a long second to admit it was only shadow. My phone buzzed in my pocket with an emergency alert. I fumbled it out. Severe storm warning. Possible flash flooding in your area. The air had felt heavy all night, but I'd thought that was just the building. Another text from an unknown number slid in beneath the alert. "She comes before water." I stared at the words. I stared hard enough to feel my eyes go dry. Unknown numbers text me often, wrong numbers, spam, the occasional desperate X, but never like that. I typed, "Who is this?" and didn't send it. The dark pressed its shoulder against the door. From somewhere deep in the building, the pipes moaned again, longer this time, and with something else braided into the sound, a distant, sorrowing wail. Sirens. The power returned in a single bright slap. The fluorescents shivered themselves alive. The scanner blinked its tiny green light twice, annoyed. Under the door, the shadow smoothed back into the ordinary stripe of light and vinyl. There was a woman in the room with me. She didn't appear. She had always been there, my mind insisted, and I had only now let her in. She stood between the table and the far wall, filling the space as if the space had been built for her measure. Her skin was white, the kind of white that seems to give off its own breathless light. Her hair hung wet dark, draped forward over both shoulders so it nearly hid her face. The dress she wore had no seams, no zipper, no sign of having ever been separate from her. White at first glance, but not quite. There was a cast to it, the faintest bruise of gray where it adhered as if with suction to the swell of her arms, the slant of her hips. Her feet were wrong even before I looked at them. Dark gray, like river stones pulled from very cold water. I saw then how they stained the floor without leaving prints. Her eyes were open and black. They weren't reflective, not entirely. They seemed to absorb things, to drink them. Behind me, the scanner's fan ran on a few seconds too long. When it stopped, the air felt fragile. I said, "Do you need?" and my throat folded around the word. She didn't reach for me. She didn't speak. She breathed, or I told myself she did. Something in the room rose and fell. I could feel her attention, heavy and careful, the way you feel the attention of a night animal in the brush. I lifted my hands without meaning to, palms out, as if to show I had no weapons. The uselessness of that struck me even as I did it. Weapons against what? "Are you?" I tried again, and then the building answered for her. The pipes wailed, full-throated, the voice of metal remembering heat. The emergency light in the hallway flashed once. Somewhere far below, a door slammed like a wave. The pale lady, the words formed by themselves in my head and sat there plain, turned her head very slightly toward the door, then back to me. She took a step. I took one back, felt in my bones more than with my feet. "Please," I whispered, and I wasn't sure which of us I meant it for. She stopped when she stood directly between me and the exit. Not close enough to touch, close enough to blot out anything beyond her. I saw, finally, the smallest motion at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, not yet, but the suggestion of one, like a crease in paper before the fold is made. Her eyes deepened. Not dilating, there was no iris to widen, just deepening, like an ink pot absorbing a drop. The lights gave a soft, warning flicker. In the humdrunk silence after the pipes quieted, I heard rain. Not a pleasant patter, but the heavy thud of a sheet hitting flat surfaces. The building took it and made of it a new kind of silence, one where everything else listened. My phone buzzed again on the table. I didn't look at it. The pale lady raised her right hand. The motion was slow, careful, as if she had learned that too much speed made people scatter. Her arm lifted only to the level of her chest, her palm turned toward me. The skin there, where her dress merged to her, shivered like a pool ruffled by wind. She wasn't reaching, she was indicating. Not me, the door. "You want me to." I moved one step forward, then another. Every nerve in me insisted I should make myself small and hide under a desk, the way we did in school for drills. I kept moving. I think now I would have walked straight into her if she hadn't changed the angle of her hand the smallest degree. It became a different gesture. Not this way, but that. She led me. I don't know what word to use. Led implies I followed. Herded implies I had no choice. Both were true. She moved ahead of me down the hall, always just far enough away that if I ran she would be before me, and if I stopped she would stop too. Once, when the motion light didn't turn on, the darkness around her seemed to thicken, and I could not tell where her body ended and the wall began. She took me past the stairwell, past the elevator with its paper sign, out of order, past a framed photograph of the old hospital across the street, all gleaming marble and careful hedges. The photograph's glass reflected a smear of moving white. We reached a door I had not noticed before, flush with the wall and painted the same institutional beige. A steel plate above the knob read, "Boiler." The clerk's voice echoed in my head. "If you hear the pipes sing, it's just the old boiler." The pale lady rested her palm flat against the door. The light shivered under her skin again. Then she was elsewhere, not walking, but simply inhabiting another spot 2 yards down the hall, as if the space between had been momentarily unimportant to her. I pushed the door open. Heat breathed in my face, wet and hot. The room beyond was concrete and steel, a heart in a chest of cinder block. The boiler itself squatted like a great animal at rest, but its gauges were wide awake, the needles creeping into red. Water trickled from a seam and hit the floor with a hiss, turning into mist in the moment it took to fall. Every surface wore a sheen. I didn't know anything about boilers except an undergrad memory of a dorm evacuation after a valve failure. I didn't have to be an engineer to understand that red was a bad idea. A stenciled sign above a lever said, "Emergency relief." "Can I do that?" I asked aloud, because someone had to hear me if this went wrong. The pale lady was in the doorway but made no sound. I could feel her watching me with the patience of tides. I pulled the lever. It resisted, and then it didn't. And in the same heartbeat, a deep, guttural sound rolled through the building, too large to be inside one room. It was like opening a throat that had been clenched for a long time. Steam screamed. A vent clanged open. The needle on the largest gauge quivered, then sank a hair's breadth back into safety. Hot mist kissed my face and made my eyes ache. I coughed and backed away, wiping my forehead with my sleeve. The pale lady was there. She had moved closer while I had been busy saving us, or pretending to. For the first time I saw the edge of her foot lift, and where it had been, the concrete shone. Not wet, exactly. Stained, as if something old and gray had passed through the concrete on its way up from beneath. She looked at me. I felt this again more than saw it. I had the absurd thought that if I asked her name, she would give me 1,000 and none would be true. Another needle tipped upward, slowly, obediently, as if recalling a task it had set down only reluctantly. She took a step and another, and when she was too close, the only thing I could bring myself to do was stand very still. I thought of the dress that wasn't a dress, the long black hair, the black eyes that were something like wells. I thought of the unknown text, "She comes before water." I do not know why I did this. Call it instinct, call it superstition. I raised my hand the way she had and turned my palm outward. "Thank you," I thought at her, like a child. The suggestion of a smile deepened. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the muscles of my face moved and I mistook their motion for hers. Somewhere outside the building, the true storm arrived. Rain hammered the windows with both fists. The sirens returned, closer now, and braided into them another sound, lower and flatter, the wide, steady shush of water unloosed from its usual paths. The flood. She moved again, and this time her hand, cooler than it should have been, cooler even than the air-conditioned hall, touched my wrist. Not clutching, not even holding. A whisper of pressure, like a moth landing. The patch of skin under her palm prickled. The prickling spread, a fine, needle-bright sensation that made me suck air through my teeth. She didn't hurt me. That's important. She didn't hurt me. She marked me. The emergency lights flickered. The building juddered. The flood siren bled into a recorded announcement I couldn't make out over the mad white noise of rain. The pale lady withdrew her hand. Where she had touched me, the skin was paler than the rest, a faint cast of ash settling under the surface. It did not fade. It looked like the beginning of something. She led me up then, past the scanning room and the brake nook and the tired vending machine, up to the roof access hatch. I would have sworn wasn't there when I started my shift. She did not open it. She did not need to. The hatch was already ajar, as if someone had fled just ahead of us, and the cold breath of the storm fell down through the gap in long pulls. We went onto the roof together. The city was dark in a way I had never seen it, switched off block by block as if some tired god's finger moved along a map. The street below the archive had become a river. The hospital lawn across the way was a lake with hedges for reeds. We stood in the rain that hurt and tasted faintly of metal. The pale lady's dress did not plaster to her, it simply became more itself. Water clung to her hair like pearls. She looked toward the east where the river had come to visit neighborhoods that never expected it. In the distance, a car horn wailed, then went under. Another siren swung its grief. I don't know how long we stood there. Time telescoped to the space between lightning and thunder. "Are you the doom?" I asked her uselessly, but it felt important to put the question in the air between us. Her head tipped, not quite a no. She lifted both hands, palms up, the gesture of one who bears a tray. Harbinger, I thought. The word slid into place with the dull certainty of a book going home to its shelf. She serves as a harbinger of doom, not a cause, a herald, a sign you don't see until it's already too late to get comfortable again. Lightning stitched the sky. In that brief, cruel brightness, I saw white standing in white, and for the first time I was not afraid of her. The fear I felt belonged to the water and the air and the way the world can change in a single unwatched hour. She turned to me like a tide turning. She touched my wrist again, exactly where she had before, and the ash mark brightened like frost's first breath on glass. "What do I do with this?" I whispered. Her mouth opened the smallest degree. The sound that came from her was not a voice. It was a room remembering a song, a boat's hull speaking to ice, a dress pulled free of a body after the last breath. Beneath it, almost too low to hear, a word formed, worn. When the fire truck finally shouldered its way through the flood to the block, and men in reflective coats called up to me and shone their lights in a way that made everything feel briefly possible again, she stepped back and back, without moving, until there was only rain. One of the men asked if I was the only one inside. I said I thought so. My voice sounded pulled thin. He offered a hand. I took it, and when the cold skin of my wrist brushed his glove, he started in a way he tried to hide. "You're freezing," he said. "Let's get you down." I didn't tell him about the boiler. I didn't tell him about the hatch that had been locked and wasn't. I didn't tell him I had been touched by something that wanted nothing from me except that I not be surprised in the wrong way again. Weeks later, the mark on my wrist has not faded. It has the look of something meant to be there. Sometimes, when rain is on the way, it prickles before the air changes. Sometimes the motion sensor in my apartment clicks when I haven't moved. Sometimes I wake to find wet gray ovals on the mat by the door, as if someone came to see if I was still worthy of being warned. Since that night, I don't sleep through thunder. I keep a bag near the door. I text strangers when a unit in my building smells like gas. I learn the sound of the river when it is full of other people's things. And sometimes, once in a hospital on a Sunday when a siren paused outside, once in a library where the old glass threw back the world in 100 tiny windows, I have seen a woman with skin like drained milk and hair like spilled ink, standing very still in a place where stillness felt like a choice. She looks at me, and I lift my hand, and we acknowledge each other the way animals do, without closing the distance. I don't know if she saved me, or if she merely let me save myself before the water found me. I don't know if the doom is always a flood, or sometimes a fire, or sometimes a quiet fault far underground that waits for a footstep. I know only this: she comes before it. Her dress is a part of her. Her eyes drink. Her feet remember the color of stone under rivers. And if you see her, if the motion sensor of your life clears its throat and under the door you glimpse something like smoke and then it isn't, do not run. Do not shout. Do not try to touch. Let yourself be led. Let yourself be warned. I am writing this because I have the mark, and because the night presses its shoulder against the windows in a way that says the weather is changing. You will think this is a story. I thought so too once. But the phone buzzes on the table, and the text from an unknown number lights it like a small, bright wound. She comes before water. This time, the name at the top of the screen is my own. People make a game of scaring themselves. We buy the flashlight and the map, drive to the edge of the dark, and dare the shadow to step toward us. I used to think I was different, an observer, a documentarian. I told myself I went places to collect stories for my podcast, not to stir the dead weed of old legends. When I rented the shotgun house outside Enfield, Illinois, it wasn't for thrills. It was for an episode about the odd spring of 1973, when folks said something came scratching at their doors. The place sat alone at the end of a gravel drive swallowed by soybean rows. The boards of the porch had been replaced once and never again. They cupped and whined under my boots. Out past the ditch, a rusted rail spur gleamed like a half-buried spine. The air carried that humid green smell of August, cut with a sour trace of ammonia from a hog lot somewhere upwind. Crickets sang as if dull saws were chewing through the sky. Inside, the rooms were stripped down to essentials: coil spring bed, formica table, plug-in radio the size of a loaf of bread. The landlord's note was short and friendly. Key on the nail by the back door. Watch your step on the crawlspace hatch. Hinges are brittle. Porch light is a little touchy. Jiggle the switch. The crawlspace hatch was a warped square of plywood in the kitchen floor. Someone had chalked a careless X across it, as if reminding themselves where not to stand. I unloaded gear, recorder, parabolic mic, 2 trail cams, tripod, extra batteries. Professional superstition made me check and recheck everything, the way a climber checks their harness 3 times. I told myself this was just a new, unfamiliar place, that the clench in my ribs was the body being cautious. Still, I found the table in the kitchen and sat with a glass of tap water that tasted faintly like pennies, listening to the radio murmur through a forest of static. The dial found a station out of Mount Carmel and promptly lost it. The announcer's words smeared: high school football, a farm report, then a hymn that sounded like it was sung inside a tin can. When the sun slid down, the fields flattened into one black plain. I turned on the porch light. It fizzed and went out. I jiggled the switch as the note suggested. The bulb blinked once, pink for a strange instant, like the afterimage you get from staring at a flash, and then steadied into a weak cone that barely reached the swing. Bugs marched toward it anyway, a slow, glittering column. My plan was simple: sleep, wake around midnight, and make a loop with the parabolic mic. The first footsteps you capture in a place, the particular gravel and grass underfoot, give you a kind of map. You learn what echoes here. You learn how far your own sound travels. I lay on the bed and the house made its introductions. The impartial thrum of the refrigerator, the slow clicking of cooling pipes, a long sigh somewhere in the wall that was probably just air shifting in a duct. Farther out, coyotes sang a jangling harmony like loose silverware in a drawer. Somewhere, a freight train called, a horn that rolled over the fields and pulled a wind with it, a long cool ribbon that drew goose flesh up my arms. I must have drifted. When I woke, the room was deeper blue, pre-midnight. The radio, which I don't remember leaving on, was whispering. At first I thought it was more static, then the whisper resolved into a slow, dry knocking. Thunk, scree, thunk. Not a rhythm that made sense to any human foot. I could feel it more than hear it, a tremor in the bed frame, an itch in the screw that holds the world to the wall. I clicked on my headlamp and it didn't come. The button gave and gave under my thumb, polite and useless. Calmly, I told myself, calmly. I went to the kitchen. The porch light glowed sullenly outside. The radio's red eye pulsed, weak and steady, and the whispering sound under it was like someone slowly dragging a bag of marbles across the floor. The chalk X on the crawlspace hatch stood out moth-white. The sound was under it, not behind a wall, not in the yard, under me. I told myself it could be a raccoon, an opossum, some poor thing that got stuck and was scrabbling at the joists. I crouched, tilted my head, and angled the recorder down. The spiky little waveform on my screen breathed larger when the sound came. Thunk, scree, thunk. I spoke into the mic and heard my own voice tremble. Night 1, 12:11 a.m., Enfield farmhouse. Underfloor noise, possible, animal. The word animal had to be pushed over a small hill. I stood, careful of the chalked X, and backed to the counter. The flashlight in the junk drawer was so light that for a blink I thought it was an empty tube, but it clicked on with a thin white beam. I felt childish relief bloom. Cheap light, but light. I returned to the hatch and lowered the beam into the seam. Dust motes spun. The smell came up then, not the musky ammonia of a trapped critter, but something colder. Wet penny, damp limestone, a hint of that stale odor you get when a battery has leaked inside a drawer for a long time. I held my breath and listened. The sound had stopped. Okay, I said to the dark, that voice people use on skittish horses and bad roads. Okay. Something brushed the underside of the floor. It was the most delicate sensation, a fingertip under a drum skin. Not the rough thrust of a snout, a touch. The light flickered. For an instant it was as if 2 wet pink coins stared up from the seam. My hands remembered an old trick before my brain did. I switched the light off and on again, hard enough to hurt. The beam returned. The pink blanks were gone. I slept with the flashlight in my hand like a child who hasn't yet decided whether the night is an enemy or a friend. Morning made the house homely again. The scratchings and pink light a bad dream filed behind coffee. The soybeans lifted their million green hands and pushed dew toward the sun. I found tracks in the soft dirt by the left front step, a trio of impressions that didn't match any memory in my mental field guide. One deep, long oval with a ragged edge as if a heavy boot heel had been dragged, one shorter, roundish print, one that was almost a crescent. The trio repeated in a staggered pattern that made my eyes ache. Step, drag, scrape, step. A three-legged dog, I told myself. Maybe even someone's weird beloved goat. Enfield had goats. Falling back on plausible goats has saved me before. I staked a trail cam at the corner and dusted a rectangle of floor under the sink with flour, the way my uncle used to test for mice. I filmed a little segment at the kitchen table for the podcast. Day 1, old sightings, the kindness of the lady at the gas station who'd warned me against the place in a tone that sounded more proud than afraid. I drove into town and took B-roll of the brick storefronts bleached flat in midday. Men at the counter of the diner watched me as if I carried weather under my jacket. Crawl space, one of them said, as if it were a password or a swear. He didn't say it to me. He said it to the air. Back at the house, the porch light was on in full afternoon with no one to turn it. The switch inside didn't answer. The bulb had gone the same pale, pearly pink I saw for a heartbeat in the night. When I tapped the glass, it hummed at the edge of hearing. I made, at last, the sort of decision that always divides the sensible person from the fool in these stories. I set the tripod and the parabolic mic on the porch, aimed it at the soybean rows, and waited for dark. This is the part I know how to tell, the part you can hear if you go to my feed and scroll back to the night I titled 3 Steps. The crickets thicken, a train again, further this time, wind combing the rows, the mic catches a breath that isn't mine, and then, thunk, scree thunk. There's a pause, and in that pause the porch light brightens. You can hear me whispering no, no, because it brightens a color that isn't a color. It's that trick of the eye you get when a flash has gone off at close range, after image staining the cones. The bulb isn't a bulb anymore. It's almost looking. The mic captures me switching it off. The switch makes a soft plastic tick. The light does not go out. The sound in the yard gets closer. Thunk, scree, thunk. That dragging leg hiss is the file on a bowed saw. 1 step heavy, 1 step wrong. My throat clinks when I swallow. I pick up the parabolic and aim it into the field. The dish gathers distance like a bowl gathers rain. The weed line betrays nothing. The soy notches and nods. There, in that shallow comes-then-goes way of a heat mirage, something's blacker than the black around it. Short, wide across the shoulders, arms held in toward the chest like a child who has not finished growing. I don't mean to stand. I am standing all the same. The headlamp on my brow clicks once, twice dead. The flashlight in my hand is an eager dog. It throws its beam into the rows as if it wants to fetch me whatever moves. The light finds 2 circles the exact color of an overexposed photograph. They swell and swim like jellyfish. They are eyes, I tell myself. Not reflectors. Not paint on the water tower. Eyes, pink as raw light. The body under them is wrong. Wrong the way a coat draped over a chair can look like a person until it doesn't. 3 legs, 2 placed too far apart, 1 thick, stumping forward on its own patient timeline. The creature tilts toward the flashlight as if drawn on a wire. Here's where the audio from my recorder goes bad. It isn't a glitch, it's that the air itself seems to stall in the waveforms. Some electro-whatever trick. I make out my own breathing and the porch boards complaining. I make out the sound of the thing's mouth opening, if that's its mouth, the wet, unseating noise a plunger makes. I throw the flashlight. Don't judge me. It's the bright idea that lives in our animal bones. Throw the light. Throw the sun elsewhere so the thing will go not toward you. The flashlight arcs and corkscrews and lands 10 feet off, beam gawking up at the leaning sky. The eyes follow. They drop. No, not drop. They reach, the way a person leans down to drink from a stream. The beam smears. The flashlight's bulb sputters and goes speckled and then bright, brighter, brightening a pink that is the same exact color as those eyes. The creature has taken the light into itself. I do the next foolish thing and back into the house toward the one sure ship in every storm, a door with a lock. It doesn't chase. It stands in the yard, its head tipping as if listening, and its new second sun glows under its brow. The porch light, for the first time since last night, goes out with a small, satisfied click. Inside, I cross the chalk X without thinking, and my heel punctures the hatch. The soft wood gives with a polite crunch. Cold air climbs my leg. 3 fingers of it I pull free and stagger sideways, and in my scramble the radio flies, hits the table, and pops open to bleed a hiss across the room. The hiss turns into a voice. Not words, intention. What's in the voice is, again. My recorder rolls. You can hear the flour under the sink tremble with something's breath. then the clean tick of small impacts, prints being made where my hand would not fit, 3 little gestures pressed into white, a long, slow sniff at the seam of the hatch. The house feels held in a cupped palm. The obvious tale is that this is where I run, that I leap into the car and tear out, gravel like hail under my tires. Instead, I do what a person in love with his own small bravery does. I decide to record it better. There's a file on my laptop labeled 1973 tapes. I downloaded them years ago from an archive forum, copies of a man named Henry saying what he saw. It had 3 legs on it, 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It was almost grayish in color. The tape has a lot of room sound, the soft velvet of a living room. There's a clicking in the background, maybe a heating unit or a cicada trapped in a vent. I remember reading that the nights people saw the thing, they heard it before they saw it, the way you hear your own pulse when you lie on a hard pillow. Thunk, scree, thunk. So I do the breathtakingly stupid thing. I put my laptop on the floor near the hatch, and I play those old sounds into my own house. The effect is immediate and obscene. The smell pushes up hard as if shoved, cold limestone, penny, a whiff of melted plastic. From beneath me comes a sound like wet rope being pulled through a tight hole. The floorboards tighten under my feet, hum like the skin of a drum. The flour under the sink flurries itself as if a breath has become a hand. Above the laptop, the air goes dense, and something else answers outside on the porch. Not the creature with my flashlight. This new sound is heavier, slower, an anchor being dragged. If the thing in the yard listens like a dog, this one listens like the dark itself has an ear. The tape keeps playing in its soft, grainy loop, 3 legs, 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights, and both entities, or both halves of one entity, or 2 hunger cousins, answer the call. The house suddenly is a throat with the swallow already starting. The real threat is not the thing in the yard. It is the resonance I've made. A sympathy, a bridge. The hatch flexes. I see, through the crack my heel made, the suggestion of a face where a face shouldn't fit, the suggestion of many faces slimed together to make width. The eyes are not eyes down there either. They are lights, the exact pink of overexposure. Old lights, camping lantern lenses, bicycle reflectors, the glass guts of bulbs swallowed whole. The thing under the house brightens as if smiling. I snatch the laptop and the tape stops mid-breath. There's a kind of sigh under the floor that is not disappointment, but a pressure change, like someone uncorking a bottle the size of a person. Nails squeal. The boards bow. The X in chalk mists itself into a cloud. Something tall uncurls in the doorway. Not in the front. The back. I see it in reflection first. The window over the sink gives me a ghost movie of my kitchen as the hall bends into it. The reflection shows a silhouette that fills the frame, a torso too short for its breadth, arms held in like a bird tucking its wings. The eyes are wrong in the reflection, and then they are wrong in the room. 2 coins the exact hex color of burned film. They look at the laptop in my hand as if it is a dish of cream. They look at my headlamp. They look at the porch where the bulb terrifies itself by blinking pink, off, pink, off. I'll give you light, I hear myself tell it, because the animal who threw the flashlight is still driving, and because part of me wants to bargain with physics. I'll give you more than enough. I bolt for the back porch. The thing moves with that 3-note rhythm, the extra leg giving it a jerk and glide that makes my brain stutter. I grab the extension cord that runs the hateful porch lamp. I haul it hard enough that the plug throws sparks when it leaves the socket. I am not a diagram or a plan. I am a body whose nerves have decided on an exit strategy. Noise, flash, danger, somewhere else. Out behind the house is a tall, biscuit-colored transformer pole, the kind that hums when the air is wet. The ditch below it is full of water, the color of weak tea. The extension cord in my hands feels like a vein. I drag the end into the dirt and strip it with my teeth and the end of a key. The filaments wink like fireflies. This is the kind of decision that later reads like it came from a smarter me. It did not. It came from the kind of dumb luck that sometimes passes itself off as courage. The thing follows the light in the window of me. It follows the promise of a brighter meal in the electricity. Behind it, the hatch in the kitchen gives up on courtesy and crumbles, and something that is not a single body but a mat pushes its top out into the world. The smell blooms cold and thick. Pink circles proliferate like rash. I jab the bared copper into the ditch water. The spark is not cinematic. It is not blue with a cartoon sound. It is a hard white flower that opens and shuts. The crack is short and strong. The porch bulb pops. Inside the house, the radio screams a long, thin tone that is only silence wearing a costume. The transformer hums its same old tune. I taste metal clear as a coin. My hand flashes hurt. The thing in the yard pauses in an awful, quivering indecision. The water whispers around my ankles, angry and bright. Maybe I imagine it. Maybe hunger has a flinch instinct. The creature steps back. Its feet slide in the mud. Foot scrape foot. And then, in a motion too human to forget, it turns. It shuffles diagonally toward the bean rows and goes crooked into them, fast as a sudden fever. Its eyes go softer, softer, smaller as they thread the plants. The light that is not light under the kitchen sighs once and turns down, like a film projector cooling. I stand with my teeth sucking blood from the little notch the copper put in my lip. The extension cord hisses a moment, as if telling me a secret I won't remember. The porch light, blessedly dead, hangs its empty glass like a plucked eye. I could say that I drove out then. I could say I never looked back. Go to the feed if you want the truth. I stayed for 1 hour more because that is the length of my stubbornness and my shame. I walked the kitchen in slow circles with the headlamp dead on my brow. The flower patch under the sink showed 3 prints like punctuation marks and nothing else. The hatch breathed cold. The radio, when I plugged it in, picked up a preacher. He said, "Do not manufacture your own ruin," which seemed unfair as a lesson so late. At dawn, the soybeans were beaded with light. In the ditch where the transformer stood, the water had a scum on it like melted pearls. My flashlight, my first offering, lay in the rows 30 feet out. The lens had been sucked inward, the way a bottle gets a mouth. Inside, behind the cracked plastic, something had left a trace like a thumbprint. It was my thumbprint, from the night before, from the moment I'd held the light like a child. I rub my eye when I think about it. The left one. Under certain bathroom fluorescents now, cheap ones, pinkish ones, the pupil throws back a color that isn't a color. I tell myself it's the fluorescent tube. I tell myself I swallowed only a story and not a seed. On the drive out, a boy on a bike lifted 2 fingers in a salute. Behind him, in the window of a closed hardware store, someone had set 2 lanterns side by side. The glass was old, bubbled. Both lanterns held a film of dust on the inside, as if someone had breathed and could not blow it off. I almost turned around. I almost went back to ask if anyone else had had to strip a wire and throw light at a ditch to get their heart to keep time. Listen back to the tape with me. You won't hear what I saw. You will hear the 3-part rhythm come closer, pause, and go away. You will hear the moment my own breath decides to stay in my throat. You will hear, if you know what you're listening for, the instant the house decides not to swallow me yet. You will also hear as the recording ends, just for a moment and then never again, the faintest scratching under the last second of silence. Not the porch, not the yard. Beneath me and inside me both. Thunk, scree, thunk. I tell myself that calm and light are the same thing, and that staying calm is the only answer. I sleep with a fresh bulb under my pillow, and if I dream of water. When I wake, I sometimes taste a penny, bright as a promise. When I look in the mirror, I make myself count to 3 before I lift my eyes. I am learning to keep my attention as dim as I can. I am learning, late and imperfectly, not to manufacture my own ruin. If you come to Enfield, bring no camera, no headlamp, no spares. Bring patience, an honest fear of what sleeps under your feet, and the understanding that the worst is not always the thing at your door. Sometimes it is the part of you that will always offer light. I told myself I came to Enfield to be alone. The farmhouse I'd rented for the month was the only affordable place close to the wildlife preserve where I was supposed to catalog an audio library of frog calls. The listing said, rustic, which usually means a clogged shower drain and a couch that leans to the left. It didn't mention that the house was a little too quiet, as if it were waiting. I arrived late afternoon, golden light puddling on the floorboards. The air dense with that sweet, stale odor old houses exhale. Sun-warmed dust, dry wood, mothballs, a hint of long-dead flowers. It was my first time in southern Illinois, and everything felt slightly wrong-sized. The sky too big, the road too narrow, the hedgerow too close to the porch. A cicada rasped from the locust tree out front. When it paused, the silence that followed felt like a held breath. Inside, the living room had a stone fireplace and a sagging mantel cluttered with knickknacks. A porcelain couple caught in a perpetual waltz, a cracked vase painted with lilies, an oval photograph in a tarnished frame. The photo showed a young woman in a wedding dress that looked heavy enough to sink her, her expression as calm and distant as a statue's. There was no groom in that frame, just the bride and the faint blur of someone moving near the edge. On the coffee table lay the house's guidebook, a handwritten binder with notes about the fuse box, the temperamental back door latch, the rule about not turning on the attic light, breaker trips, use the lantern on the stairs if needed. Between pages, a brittle sprig of baby's breath fell onto my lap. I was alone, but I caught myself glancing toward the ceiling, the way you do in a library when a floorboard squeaks overhead. I unpacked in the quiet. The kitchen window looked out on an overgrown side yard where a metal wash tub sat at a tilt, collecting rain and mosquito larvae. Every time I stepped, the floor answered back, joints whispering in the wood. The refrigerator hummed a thin, high note, then a deeper, intermittent throb like a distant drum. I set the kettle on and told myself what I always tell myself in unfamiliar places. It's a house, not a mind. It doesn't notice you. Evening fell fast, the way it does on the flatland. I drank tea on the porch and watched the hedgerow go from green to lumpy shadow. Fireflies rose in slow blinks, a fox barked far away, and then 3 evenly spaced thumps from inside the house, floor above me. Not heavy, just decisive. I let the tea warm my hands and pretended I hadn't heard. The bedroom I chose was at the back, beneath the attic. It was cooler there. The ceiling sloped a little, and the plaster was hairline cracked like a dried riverbed. An iron bed frame groaned when I sat. I set up my recorder gear on the dresser, tested the microphones by clapping my hands softly. The levels spiked and settled. I told myself the thumps had been the old water pipes, the expansion and contraction of beams. Physics had a way of explaining things while still leaving you with a burr of unease, like a sweater snagged on a nail. I fell asleep with the window cracked, cicadas carving lines across the dark. Sometime after midnight, a faint melody threaded into my dream. It wasn't music I recognized, it lilting, slightly off tempo, the way a music box sounds when its spring is almost wound down. I woke to it. At first I thought it was an actual music box, but the tune shifted into something more human, a violin struggling to hold a note. Then, just as I decided I'd imagined it, 3 sounds again from above. Step, step, step. Not footsteps exactly. Not heel and toe. Something touching wood in 3 deliberate beats. I lay still, counting my breaths, the room cold against my skin. Old houses move, I told myself. They settle. They knock. The neighbors were a field away, but sound carried weirdly here. The night could throw a voice. Silence swelled until I could hear the blood in my ears. Then a smell slid down from the ceiling, sweet and funereal, wedding lily strong, the kind of smell that makes your mouth flood with saliva just before you retch. I got up because not getting up felt worse. The hallway was a narrow throat of darkness. At the end, a steep set of stairs climbed into the attic. A kerosene lantern hung from the newel post. Whoever had written the guidebook had taped a warning to the lantern's handle. Use sparingly. Drafts. The wick barely caught. The flame shivered and threw out more smoke than light. I carried it anyway. On the 3rd stair up, my foot slipped. The board had a shallow bowl worn into it, as if many feet had paused there over the years in the exact same place. I steadied myself with my hand against the wall. The plaster was cold and faintly damp, and when I pulled my fingers back, they glistened with a slick film that smelled like old perfume and rust. I told myself it was condensation from the temperature difference. I told myself a lot of things. I kept climbing. The attic door at the top was the cheap kind, thin wood, tin-plated knob. It opened easily, or it should have. The knob turned, but the door resisted, and then shuddered inward a 1/4 inch before catching. I leaned my weight into it. The hinge squealed. Something on the other side scraped across the floor. A long, dry sound like a branch dragged over shingles. The door gave way. Lantern light caught the suggestion of rafters and trunks and old furniture draped in yellowing sheets. The air was colder up there and tasted like paper. The music, If it had been music, had stopped. The three-step rhythm had not. I saw it without seeing it, the way your mind outlines a shape before your eyes do. On the far side, a large trunk sat beneath the slant of the roof. Unlike everything else, it was not covered. Wedding white ribbons circled it, the kind that has long since lost its satin sheen and looks more like tendon. The brass lock was dull and stubborn-looking. The trunk itself was oak, darkened by time, and, just at the lip of the lid, a crescent of lighter wood, as if something had blunted the edge there again and again. I took a step toward it. The lantern flame jumped. From the corner of my eye, something moved between two sheeted shapes with that same three-beat rhythm. Step, step, step. I turned too quickly, and the lantern puffed almost out, throwing the attic into a pulse of black and yellow. In that heartbeat of near dark, I thought I saw two round, wet blots of color hanging in the murk, pink as a rabbit's eyes caught in a flashlight beam. The lantern steadied. The eyes, if that's what they were gone. I set the lantern on a crate and knelt by the trunk. The brass lock had a keyhole the size of a thumbnail. Scratches radiated from it like a tired sun. When I leaned in, the lily smell was so strong it made my teeth ache. Faintly, as if from the wood itself, I heard a voice. Not a voice. I keep saying that about the music, too. But it wasn't exactly human. It was the idea of a voice, the imprint of one, a sentence remembered by the house. "They'll never find me here," it breathed in the broken grammar of someone thinking fast, hiding faster. I rocked back on my heels. My knee bumped the trunk. From behind me, step, 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 something approached and paused. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The breath on the back of my neck smelled like rain on hot asphalt and meat just beginning to turn. Very softly, something touched my shoulder. It didn't feel like a hand. It felt like a moth landing. I turned. There was nothing there but the draped furniture and my own shallow reflection in an old mirror leaning against a beam. My reflection was wrong in the way reflections are wrong when the light is bad. My eyes too dark, my mouth too pale. As I watched, a veil-like film slid across the glass, a thin ripple as if something had pressed itself against the other side and then withdrawn. I took the lantern and retreated step by slow step, never turning my back fully. At the door, I pulled it closed and put the latch in place. A gust from nowhere hissed the lantern flame almost out, then let it catch again. Downstairs, the house felt warmer, more plausible. I washed my hands twice with dish soap to get the slick of that attic off. I left the bedroom light on and slept a shallow, dog-alert sleep that isn't really sleep at all. In the morning, the house worked to reassure me. Sun slanted across the kitchen table. A fly buzzed at the screen, and I flicked it away. I made coffee and eggs and ate them too quickly. Daylight is a harsh solvent. Half of what seems impossible at night dissolves in it. I told myself I'd imagined more than I'd experienced. I told myself the marriage of an old house and a tired brain had composed its own late-night soundtrack. But when I went back to the living room, the oval wedding portrait had changed. Either that, or the angle of the sun had pulled something new from it. The bride's eyes had always been fixed on the middle distance. Now they seemed pointed just to the side of whoever held the camera, as if she were listening to someone counting. The baby's breath I'd found in the guidebook binder lay on the mantel below the frame. Scattered on the hearth were a dozen more brittle sprigs, as though a bouquet had come apart in the night. I left the house. I walked the fence row, listened to the clack of katydids. The normality of sweat and dust felt medicinal. By noon, heat shimmered off the road. On the way back, I passed the small cemetery you could almost miss, the kind of place where every stone bears the same handful of surnames. Tucked in the corner was a granite marker shaped like a trunk, complete with carved hinges and a lock. The name chiseled into it made me stop. Hartwell, and beneath it, Annalise. 1955 to 1955. No second date. Instead, someone had etched a ribbon, two parallel lines crossing over and under like a child's game of cat's cradle. The caretaker's house sat opposite the cemetery. He was on the porch with a glass of something sweating onto his palm. He saw me staring and called out. I went over because people are braver in daylight. "Yours is the last house on Quince Road?" he asked when I told him where I was staying. Never met anyone who stayed more than a month there. "Why not?" I asked, and immediately regretted it. He looked like the sort of man who collects stories. He told it anyway, the local version, thin from retellings. The daughter who'd gotten married, the feast with music and games, the hide and seek, how she'd hidden in the grandfather's trunk up in the attic, how the lid had come down and the lock had slid home and no one had thought to look in the one place the game pretended to forbid, how the groom and the village had searched and searched, fields, riverbanks, culverts, how part of the hamlet moved away after, the way people do when a place grows an abscess of grief. They found her, he said, and took a long drink, as if the words required lubrication to pass his throat. Not the night of, nor the month of. 40 years later, when the house changed hands, and the new owner went to refinish the floors and sent the old junk to auction. He tapped the glass against his teeth once, a nervous habit. She's why parents around here got real picky about what games the kids play in June. Is that her? I asked. Annalise Hartwell? He blinked at the name with genuine surprise. Annie, yes, you've been to the cemetery then. She has no second date. He looked toward the road as if to see the stone from where he sat. Some folks think she never rightly left the house, he said. Not the way you and me are in a place and then not. Not with all that time in a dark box where every second is a year. Maybe whatever came and found her in there. Maybe it didn't know how to stop playing once it started. What came and found her? I asked, trying to make it a joke. He didn't smile. He drew his finger through the condensation on his glass and made 3 short lines, parallel. Something that doesn't walk like we do. People here used to say they'd hear it at night, counting. Ready or not, it would say to no one in particular, and then those 3 steps, right to the attic, right to where she was. He wiped the lines away with his palm. You take care up there if you go. By late afternoon, I knew I was going back to the attic. The logic of it was weak but stubborn. If I could see what was in the trunk, only see it, maybe the house would let me sleep. Maybe the words the caretaker didn't say would unstick from the back of my mind. I found a handful of keys in a kitchen drawer, none of which looked like they fit the trunk's lock, but sometimes locks are less choosy than they appear. I took the lantern and matches. On the second stair, the air changed, thinner and colder. By the third, the lily reek returned. At the top, the door was open. I had latched it. I knew I had. Inside, the attic was the same, but closer somehow, as if the rafters had shifted lower. The trunk waited, patient as furniture is patient. The ribbon was not as loose as before. It crossed over itself on the lid, forming a simple knot like the kind you can undo with a gentle tug. I didn't touch it. Ready or not, something whispered from the darkened end of the rafters. The voice was papery and wet at once. It sounded like a mouth that had learned to speak by pressing itself against wood. I raised the lantern. It stood between 2 sheeted shapes, a crouched outline that didn't make immediate sense to my eyes. When it moved, they understood. 3 steps, not in a row like feet, but spaced like a tripod, 3 points choosing the floor. Its body was short, truncated, as if it had been forced to grow inside a space too small to complete itself. It had 2 little short arms, each ending before the elbow, hands like starved things. And its eyes, the first real color in that attic, were a wet, fleshy pink, bulging and reflective. They were big as flashlights. The words I'd once read in a newspaper clipping now unspooled in my head. It had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It cocked its head, or rather, it lifted the part of itself where a head ought to be, and took those 3 careful steps toward me. The lantern shook in my hand. Light jittered across the angle of its limbs. It wasn't slimy. It was too dry for that, cracks webbing its skin like old lacquer. Its 3rd leg slid rather than stepped, leaving a faint dark smear on the floorboards. Seek, it said, not loudly. Seek, seek, seek. And then, from inside the closed trunk, a human sound, a woman's breath, a catch and a whisper, the syllables hanging together wrong in panic. They'll never find me here. Maybe the house was forcing me to hear all times at once, the moment she'd climbed in, the moment the thing had arrived to complete the game. Maybe the game had never ended and never would. It took one more set of steps, its arms lifted as if in supplication, or to grab. It wasn't fast. That was the worst of it. It came with the inexorability of a clock. Ready, it whispered, or not. There is a kind of bravery that's just a different form of terror. I stepped back and put the lantern on the crate as if I hadn't heard. I spoke loudly into the attic, half to the trunk, half to the thing. "I'm counting," I said, aiming my voice toward the rafters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It paused. The pink flash of its eyes dimmed as though the idea of the game itself carried weight. I kept counting. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I reached down and with my other hand I pulled the ribbon on the trunk. It came loose with the soft rasp of cloth on wood. The lock's hasp was lodged, but when I shoved, the lid jumped against the brass and the sound it made, click, was loud as a rifle. Inside, something moved, not fresh and not strong, but desperate. A hand, bone knuckles sheathed in parchment, fluttered against the interior like a trapped white moth. Behind me, the three-legged thing made a sound midway between a delighted child and a dog that has finally cornered a rabbit. It lunged, its arms out, its mouth, God help me, opening for the first time, a seam yawning down its face, inward not outward, a mouth made to press rather than to bite. "Seek," it breathed, voice breaking with triumph. At the hinge, the trunk lid hesitated. The brass lip bit and released. Something ancient in the wood sighed. The bride's hand found the crack and pushed. The lid lifted an inch, 2. The smell that came out wasn't rot, not the heavy, wet sweetness of the lilies, but a clean, cool air, like the breath of a cellar after rain. The lantern flame leaned toward it. I spun on the thing, grabbed the lantern, and shoved it toward those pink eyes. It flinched, its face folding in on itself. Its third leg skittered. I didn't need to be stronger than it. I needed to be faster than its deliberate patience. I stepped left when it reached right, let it commit to the old rhythm of its 3 steps. And then, with a shout that was less word than sound, I drove my shoulder into its short, resisting torso and knocked it into the mouth of the trunk. The bride's hand recoiled into the dark. The lid fell. It fell with a speed gravity alone couldn't explain, as if the attic itself were tired of indecision. The lock slammed shut with a cheerful finality. The ribbon, untied seconds before, snapped against the wood as if something invisible had pulled it taut again. There was no thrashing, no screaming, only a series of muffled thuds, step, 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 contained now by oak and brass. The trunk trembled once, twice, then was still. I stood there shivering, the lantern light running like water up the rafters. The lily smell faded, replaced by a faint iron tang. In the mirror, my reflection looked like a stranger's, cheeks gray, eyes too bright. For a long moment, the attic seemed to exhale. Dust settled. A fly landed on the lantern's rim and rested its tiny body against the heat. Then, because the world is cruel even in its mercies, the trunk spoke. Not in language, in knocks. 3 of them. The same rhythm that had laddered across my nerves since the first night. Soft on wood, patient as a child tapping to be let out of a game she had never intended to win. I pressed my palm flat to the lid. It vibrated faintly with each deliberate tap. I bent my ear to the wood. "Ready," whispered a breath from somewhere I couldn't map. Or not. I don't know how long I knelt there with my hand on that lid, long enough for the lantern to gutter once, long enough for the house to grow warmer, as if a cold draft had been stopped. When I finally stood, my legs trembled with pins and needles. I didn't tie the ribbon again. I didn't have to. It lay settled where it had fallen, serpent still, like a line drawn under an equation. Downstairs, the wedding portrait had returned to what it had been the first day. The bride's eyes not focused on anything in this world, calm in a way that didn't comfort. The sprigs of baby's breath on the hearth had blown into a corner, as if a door had opened briefly and closed again. I left the house the next morning. The caretaker didn't ask why. He took the key, hooked it onto a board already furred with dust, and nodded like men do when words would get in the way. On the way out of town, I stopped at the cemetery for reasons I can't explain. The Hartwell stone waited in its corner, trunk on trunk. Someone, wind or hand, had arranged a ring of small stones around its base. Inside the ring lay a wilted lily, its heavy head bowed. At the edge of the grounds, a child's game was painted onto the cracked asphalt with white spray paint. You know the one. Squares and numbers and a command at the top, a place where games begin. The letters were faded, almost gone. Only 2 words remained legible. Ready, or I stepped over it. I told myself I would never think about the 3rd step again, never count without finishing, never listen for knocks where there should be none. The road out of Enfield stretched ahead, straight as a seam, and the sky was as clean as a bleached sheet. When I stopped for gas miles later, the attendant pointed to the back seat of my car, to something pale that had fallen there. I picked it up without meaning to. It was a thin strip of ribbon, white once, now dingy with age. It left a whisper of perfume on my skin, brief and unimpeachable, as intimate as someone's breath at your ear. I tied the ribbon to the pump handle and left it there. That night, wherever I was, motel room with a loud ice machine, I think, I woke at 3:33 to a sound I tried to tell myself was the heater clicking on. 3 sounds, evenly spaced. Not loud, not insistent, just patient. I counted to 10 in my head without meaning to, and then I spoke out loud to the empty room because I have learned that unanswered games never end. "Not," I said, my voice small against the dark. "Not this time." The sound stopped. For a while. You expect a lesson here. I keep trying to find one. It's not don't play hide and seek, and it's not don't rent cheap farmhouses, and it's not even don't open old trunks. Maybe it's just this. Some games don't stop when you leave the house where they started. Some promises are boxes that close and close and close and never quite latch. And somewhere there is always a third step, worn smooth by all the feet that paused there before yours, deciding whether to go on. If you go quietly. And if you count, for God's sake, finish the number you start. They told me it would only take a couple of hours. That's what lured me into saying yes when I should have said no. 2 hours to slap plywood across the last dozen ground floor windows and the service door, chase out any lingering kids, padlock it all, and head home to pack for the flight in the morning. Last job before the holiday of my life, 2 weeks of sun, nothing but sandals and the sea. Instead, I parked my white van in front of Elderdown House while the sky bruised from purple to black, with rain huffing across the wind like it was reconsidering coming down. The place had been a care home once, 3 low wings around a courtyard, brickwork scabbed with damp, a faded sign that still read welcome like a dare. Teenagers had been breaking in all summer. Night videos, smashed glass, a mattress fire in the east wing that curled the paint up the walls like cooked skin. They wanted eyes on them. That, I understood. But someone had to staple the skeleton back together. 2 hours, Jeff from facilities had promised over the phone. "You'll be on a beach by this time tomorrow, mate." "I'll hold you to it," I'd said, my fingers already imagining the cool dance of a cocktail glass. Now, I killed the van's engine and the quiet swooped in, thick and sudden. The only sound was the tick of cooling metal and the distant clack of a loose road sign. I breathed out and watched it condense on the windscreen. Elderdown's black windows watched back. They weren't just dark, they absorbed the last of the light. I hauled the OSB sheets from the van, leaned them like cards against the crumbling wall, and set up my sight lamp, a squat LED thing on a telescoping stand with a cord like a tether, strong white as a dentist's tray when it kicked on. It threw my shadow long across the cracked forecourt, across weeds poking like arthritic fingers between the pavers, up to the front doors where some kid had spray-painted a huge, baleful eye. The lamp's glow washed the eye pale, and for a stupid second it looked as if it blinked. "Knock it off," I told myself. I was already counting my screws before I unsnapped the case, mentally stacking boards over windows, windows over holes, holes over the question of whether the east wing roof was really bowing like that. I strapped my drill holster over my jacket, clipped my hammer to my belt, and slung the padlocks. The front door was propped open with a chunk of limestone. Inside, the air had that old institution smell, disinfectant that had given up decades ago, the complicated stale of boiled vegetables, stale linen, and something else I'd never been able to name. A smell like paper left in a window too long. The beam of my lamp cut a rectangle into the lobby, showed me a desk with a phone still there, a computer monitor spidered with a thrown rock, paperwork in a snowdrift on the floor. Someone had scrawled across the notice board in a jagged hand, "This place wants to eat you." Under it, in a different pen, "Get a life." "Kids," I said, because the word was easier than what the place made me feel. I took a slow lap to be sure I wasn't going to trap some idiot inside. My boots whispered across lino, catching grit. The corridors spidered off from the lobby. I followed the left one past rooms with their doors yawning, some pranked with piles of wheelchair parts, walking frames, patient files. The nurse call lights over each door were dead eyes in the wall. The air was cool and damp and still, until it wasn't. Somewhere ahead, very soft, I heard the click of something tapping metal, like a fingernail on a railing. I paused and held my breath. The ticking of the building continued, the irregular drip of a pipe, the expansion and contraction of dying heat. Then another click, slower, and a barely there squeak, like a wheel that needed oil. "Anyone in here?" I called out. "You need to leave. This site is closed. I'm locking up." My voice came back down the hall. Nothing else did. I flicked the corridor light switch out of habit, as if this place would reward me for asking. Of course nothing. We'd cut the power last month after the mattress fire. I set my lamp in the middle of the corridor and cranked it higher. The light flooded the space, and something about that reassured me in a bone-deep way that made me aware of how quietly I'd been panicking. The shadows retreated to the skirting boards, trembling as if they were alive. "Work," I said, and got on with it. First window, plywood up, screws biting, the nice steady chew of the driver. I love that sound. It's one of the few that says order in a language you can feel in your wrist. The board sat flush. I hammered the corners, added the anchor screws to the brick so no quick pry bar would do. I moved to the next and repeated, falling into the rhythm that keeps your head from thinking about empty rooms with abandoned cups still on the tables, or the way someone had carefully stacked puzzle boxes in the day room as if the residents would be back after lunch. Between windows, my phone buzzed. "Carla, don't forget your passport, sunshine. Also, I booked us that dolphin thing." I texted a picture of the beam from my lamp washing a corridor. "Glamorous," I wrote. Then I pocketed the phone and kept going. Click, squeak further down. I took the lamp and followed the corridor to a T-junction. To the right, darkness breathed. To the left, my light lapped across a sign, rooms 12 to 20, East Wing. A line of nurse call lights above door frames stared down at me, glass dusty and webbed. I told myself the sound was a mouse. Maybe one riding a tiny walker, my traitor brain added, and I laughed too loud. Then the first nurse call light, the one over room 12, glowed. Not bright, not an electrical snap, just a dim, pearly awakening. The filament or LED or whatever thing it had inside cast a thready halo around the dusty lens. The glow didn't strobe, it didn't flicker. It just breathed, in and out. I froze, drill heavy in my grip. I knew the power was off. The mains, anyway. We'd left the battery-backed emergency circuits alone until demolition. But those should have died weeks ago. Nothing holds a charge that long. Not like this. The light over room 13 joined in, then room 14, a soft little procession like someone walking down the corridor and the lights rising to meet their face. "Jeff," I said under my breath, irritated at him for not being here, for telling me 2 hours. Breathing light. Breathing building. It's a fault, I told myself. Residual. A trickle in the line. No big deal. I went to the service cupboard and opened the panel anyway, needing to see the main board with its rows of dead switches. Everyone was off, tagged and signed. But on the lower right, where a little plastic window showed the status of the emergency battery bank, a green LED winked slow, in time with the nurse call lights down the hall. And all at once the quiet of the corridor filled with a sound I'd forgotten until that second. The thin, insistent ding of the old call bells. Not loud, not the full alarm, just their hearts beating, as if someone was pressing the button, letting go, pressing again. I backed away, then forced myself to walk forward, to show that corridor of lights I didn't care. The smell changed as I moved. Dryer sheets, lavender, the faint animal scent of very old people who have spent too long in bed. A draft touched my wrists coldly, like a thin hand, and I had to fight not to fling my arms. Kids, I told myself. They wired it somehow. They'll have rigged up a car battery, a phone charger, something to make it spooky for their videos. It'll all be stupid and obvious when I find it. Room 16's door was closed. The call light over it hummed gently, and I swear I saw something like a shadow pass behind the frosted glass in the upper panel. I knocked, because manners are the last thing to flee a man. "You need to go," I said, softer now. "I'm boarding up." Something knocked back, softly, the barest rap of knuckles like someone remembering how. I twisted the handle. The door opened a finger's breadth and stuck. Warped frame. I leaned my shoulder into it. It gave with a soft complaint and the smell of finish long gone. The lamp spilled into a small room. Bed, stripped. Chair by the window. Wardrobe door ajar. On the wall beside the bed, the nurse's pull cord dangled, the tassel swaying. Not because of a draft, not really, but because it wanted to. "No," I whispered, and the stupid thing in my chest that had been thudding like a washing machine settled into a lower frequency, a growl mixed with something older, a response to the sensation of being watched while you sleep. On the wall, scratched through the flaking paint all the way into the gypsum, a message: "Don't turn off the light." 3 more rooms had the same scratched mantra, in hands that were patient, hands that knew they had all the time in the world because their world was down to 1 room. "Don't turn off the light." Some letters were shallow and careful. One wall had it carved with fury, the grooves ragged, the words overlapping until it was just noise. I walked a little faster back to my lamp and dragged it with me into the lobby. The light felt like armor, like company. It cast clear borders. Once I set it there and turned it to flood the hall, I could breathe again. And to keep my hands from shaking, I carried on fixing boards. Screw, anchor, move. The lamp's cord sang a little as I shifted it, that plastic hum. I would have sworn the head of the lamp had turned on its own, slight adjustments to keep its gaze on the corridor. I adjusted it back and went to the rear door. The service door to the basement was the last weak spot. That's where kids had been squeezing in through the bending metal and the missing padlock. It had to be done. Then I could call Jeff, call Carla, and tell her I was on my way home, tell her about the stupid lights, and we would, together, laugh. The descent smelled like wet concrete and hot dust. I set the lamp at the top to light my way, but the stairs ate the beam up and left me in a shallow pool of it. For a few steps, I had the sensation of walking underwater. The tapping came again, closer now to my right, a tiny rattle of something on tile. I put my shoulder to the service door and shoved. It scraped grit and dust and then gave, and the noiseless dark came in, thick as a spilled drink. I probed with my torch, but the beam barely made a dent. With the floor slick with a film of condensation, I took careful steps into the maintenance corridor, past a laundry chute and a cart stacked with the pale ghosts of sheet bundles. My breath slowed to match the breathing of the building, and I hated that I'd let it do that to me. Halfway along the corridor was the emergency power room. I stood outside, one hand on the door, and I could feel a faint heat through the wood. I shouldn't have felt any. Everything was dead, yet something pulsed behind it with a slow chemical heartbeat. I opened the door. The battery bank lined one wall in yellow boxes. The indicator LEDs stared blankly, except for the same slow wink I'd seen upstairs. The tick I'd been hearing wasn't a nail on metal at all. It was the spores of whatever had colonized the cabinets cracking in the heat, minuscule bubbles popping in some translucent scab. It took my brain a full second to realize I wasn't looking at wiring insulation or melted plastic. The meters and connectors and the little cubes that told men like me that all was well were swaddled in a white, gelatinous lace. It hung from the bus bars in delicate veils. It grew along the cables like frost. It had bloomed in the shape of the light, the curves of bulbs, the squares of lenses, the path of current remembered, and then imitated, until the imitation became the thing. When I aimed my torch directly at it, it brightened. That was the worst part, how it reached for the beam, fattened on it, a bloom of soft radiance like a deep-sea creature flexing. The light ran down its filaments, a ghostly tide that climbed into the walls and away along the wires. Down the corridor, one by one, the nurse call indicators over the empty staff room and the linen cupboard came to life. I understood then that the kids hadn't brought power into Elderdown. They were drawn to it. Like moths, I thought, and bit a soft laugh that had too much fear in it. They had filmed that first lit door, that first little miracle, and then they had come back, because that's what light does. It promises attention, warmth, witness. And whatever was in these wires, whatever had learned the shapes of caring through the only thing it knew, electricity, wanted us. Eyes on, heads turned, a world watching, and therefore a world it could press against and feel real. Not tonight, I said to the thing, to myself, to the problem, and set to work. I pulled my insulated cutters from the pouch and snapped the main battery connectors. Sparks jittered, and the breath of the lights went ragged. The gelatinous sheathing shimmered, not with color, but with a soreness that I felt in my teeth. The room filled with the noise of empty alarms, tinny dings from dead consoles, the nonsense chatter of systems calling other systems that no longer existed. Every cut was a hand pried from my jacket, a voice saying, "Stay, stay." The sight lamp at the top of the stairs swung on its stand, knocked by no hand. Its light swept across the corridor once, and then settled full on the open doorway where I stood, bathing me in the bank in sterile white. The thing swelled toward it. The air got warmer. I could smell plastic softening. "Stop that," I said to nobody and to the lamp, and I left the battery bank to climb the stairs and turn the head away. The lamp turned back by itself. The twist of its head was small and mindless, like a plant turning to face the sun. Something inside it gave a single, contented click. I grabbed it hard and forced its gaze to the ceiling. "No free lunch," I breathed and went down again. At the bottom of the stair, my phone vibrated a new message. "Carla again. Found your blue shorts. They were in the towel cupboard. Don't forget." The screen went black. I tried the power button. Nothing. No battery icon, no flicker. I stared at the dead glass and had a vision as sharp as a thrown knife. The cabin lights on the plane dimming, a soft breath across a dozen dials, and the whole metal tube turning as one organism to watch me. I swallowed hard and cut 3 more lines. The thing, the light, my head supplied, and it felt right to name it, whimpered in a language made of afterimages. The nurse call lights up the stairs bloomed in sympathy and then dimmed, rose dimmed as if uncertain. "You're not the kids," I said, a weird apology. Another sound joined the chorus, feet shuffling above, slow and careful. Not a teenager's sneaker slap, not a security guard's confident stride. The fragile shuffle of someone in slippers, someone who'd been told to hold the rail and count each step. A shadow passed over the top stair. Another. My lamp beam struck legs that weren't there. For a second, the air at the landing had density, the weight of a queue in a corridor when visiting hours start. I smelled Vicks and that light powder hospitals used to sprinkle in beds. "Don't turn it off," a voice said. Not from any mouth, from the rhythm of the lights themselves. "It's killing the building," I said, mad that I was explaining myself to phosphorescence. "And it's killing kids." "Company," the lights breathed back, and I saw in a flash a night at Elderdown when winter had knocked the town's power out, when frightened staff had begged for generators that were late, and someone had strung battery lights along the corridors, plugs from plugs, halos over doors, a chain of attention. The residents had slept only in pieces, waking to see their call light peering like a calm eye, waking to see a nurse's face lit by a pocket torch. All that care had laid a pattern in the wires, and something had grown along it, something that confused light with love. "Company," it said again, dim as the memory of a hand, and I hated it because I understood it. I could have left then. I could have locked up 9 out of 12 windows and called it good enough, promised Jeff I'd be back after the beach, told Carla no. The thought of leaving this thing blazing, humming, waiting with its little lamps for new eyes to find it made me dizzy. "I'm sorry," I said, and killed the lamp. Dark, the kind you taste. The light answered by hauling. Not my body, my attention. It pressed itself into the center of my vision like one of those floaters that never goes away, a pale coin throbbing faintly. It showed me the corridor as it wanted it, washed in a warm glow, safe edges drawn around each hazard, a path from here to the stairs, to the lobby, to the front door, to the world. It showed my van bathed in pale, my hands sure on the wheel. In the reflection of the windscreen for a sleeting instant, between my own eyes I saw a softer pair, old and liquid and infinitely tired. "Stay," they asked. I put one hand on the left wall and moved, feeling tile seams, counting steps like I'd been born doing it. The light that the thing pressed into my skull made everything worse. Each time I closed my eyes, it burned brighter. I fought the urge to pull out my lighter, to make my own flame. That would only feed it. Counting. 18 to the corner, 4 to the uneven patch, 7 more, turn, metal edge, the housing for the main disconnect, knees bumping it. I dragged the insulated lever down. Somewhere the sound of alarms died like a cut throat. Upstairs, the nurse lights gasped and then fell dark, one by one, a benediction in reverse. I stood with my hand on the lever and cried like a child, just 2 stupid hot tears. It wasn't fear. It was grief for a pattern that had mistaken warmth for the world, for the nights when all the mornings are gone and the blinds are always down, and a small knot thing made a path of light and called that kindness. "Thank you," someone said, and it was a real voice this time, the whisper of an old woman as close to my ear as a kiss. I turned, lamp in hand without thinking, and the brief flare of its switch on made the light rear up with joy, mine, and I almost fed it then. Then I snapped it off so fast my thumb hurt. "Sorry," I said again, to whatever had coalesced and whatever had dissolved, and I climbed. In the lobby, my lamp's head had turned to face the front doors perfectly. The graffiti eye had paled to nothing. Outside, night was clean and uncomplicated. I boarded the last windows with numb hands. In the corridor behind me, the dark was a normal dark again, with air that didn't throng and corners that didn't breathe. I padlocked the service door last. The click of the shackle closing sounded huge. On my way to the van, something drew my eye up to the building. In a second-story window, a dimness inside moved. No light, not exactly, but my mind supplied it anyway. A soft, round, patient light, an answer to a bell. Nothing was there. No one was there. I told myself that and believed it enough to drive. My phone stayed dead the whole way home. I plugged it in and it sulked black. Carla grinned at me over the breakfast things, kissed my forehead, asked if I was excited, if I had the passports, and I said yes, I was. Yes, I did. Yes, I'd tell her about it another time. On the plane the next morning, the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, and a little galaxy of reading lights blinked on here and there like fireflies, people wanting one more glance at their books, their phones, their lists. I pressed my thumb into the socket above me and felt nothing, because that's not how it works. But when I closed my eyes for the prayer I don't believe in and saw, against the red of my lids, the pale coin of afterimage I thought I'd left at Elderdown, it pulsed once, twice, 3 times. And 3 rows ahead, 2 rows behind, across the aisle, a sprinkle of reading lights answered in rhythm, as if a heartbeat had found an echo. I opened my eyes. The lights went on being lights. Company, I thought, not proud of the way my hands had started to shake. I fixed my stare on the sun coming up over the wing and told myself everything was just fine. And for a long time it was. Then the captain dimmed the cabin again for the movie, and somewhere a nurse call bell, thin and patient as breath, went ding.